Eons ago, when I was just 25, my sole ambition was to kill myself. Even though I had managed to accumulate all the outward signs of success, a job, an apartment, a boyfriend, I was paralyzed with misery. Somehow, I couldn't get over having been psychiatrized half to death a few years earlier. I didn't believe in psychotherapy, but in desperation I put myself into the hands of a very sweet old guy who practiced something called neuro-linguistic programming. Mostly he tried and failed to put me into trances. One time he hung me by the ankles from a tree branch, assuring me that as he swung me gently back and forth, my breathing would be corrected and my psychological problems would magically evaporate. One time he let me smoke a joint in his office with his nurse girlfriend observing and taking notes. I appreciated the considerable time and effort he put into trying to help me, but it did no good at all. The only thing he did that in retrospect makes any sense was to ask me, "How would you know if you were okay?" I answered without hesitation, "I'd be writing." I was taught to write long before I started school. By age 6, I was cranking out little illustrated booklets involving princesses and animals and regular 6-year-old girl stuff. All through school, I wrote stories and poems and drew comics, often when I was supposed to be paying attention to history or math or science lessons. As a teenager, I wrote complex, sophisticated poetry, some of which I still think is pretty good. That was before my brain was massacred by psychiatric drugs. Here's the best poem I wrote on my first psych ward when I was 20 years old and drugged. Not allowed this, not allowed that. Is it any wonder I'm turning into a dingbat? It was 1978. I had been locked up for months on end at North York Branson Hospital. I kept this little notebook in which I wrote and drew as well as I could manage, which wasn't very well because of all the Haldol they were making me take. Haldol is a particularly nasty example of a class of drugs variously known as anti-psychotics, neuroleptics, or phenothiazines. This is when I created my own comic book hero, Question Man. Question Man served me as best friend and alter ego, helping me get through the long, slow, empty days on the ward. He wasn't well drawn, and he wasn't any too smart, but for some reason that was okay. I lurched through my days in an embarrassing state of confusion. I would get lost on the ward, despite its simple layout. I would walk into the bathroom, toothbrush in hand, and not be able to remember what I was there for. The impossibility of orienting myself, of keeping a task in my mind long enough to carry it out, was just ugly. But when Question Man was confused, it was kind of cute. I felt debilitated and stupid, physically and mentally. I couldn't understand how this terrible thing had happened to me, how I had come to live in this awful place. I thought it must be my fault. I wanted to scream at myself for the way my thoughts kept melting in my head. But Question Man could play with those ideas instead of blaming. I had no idea how to get out of this deep hole I had fallen into, of not being able to be normal, to be okay, of barely being able to write. In me, the lostness was terrifying, but in Question Man it was sort of endearing. I couldn't figure out how I had come to be so alone, cut off from my family, from my ancestors. Not one of them had been crazy, as far as I knew. Why did everyone else have a real head with a functioning brain in it, while all I had, where my head used to be, was this wobbly balloon filled with strange, heavy helium the color of Haldol? In me this was sickening, but in Question Man it was somehow hilarious. I was shamefully weak. Question Man was touchingly weak. My coordination was impossibly bad. I was stumbling around in a world that made no sense. On the ward, there was nothing the least bit funny about that, but in my notepad, I had Question Man stub his toe on a cat. I hated myself, and it hurt. Mostly I wanted to die, and I couldn't even do that. Into Question Man, I poured all that remained of my creativity, my hope, my love of humanity, and my desire to live.